Well, happy Veterans Day out there, shopkeepers and do-it-yourselfers. Today we're going to put some electric brakes on this little cargo trailer, single axle cargo trailer. The guy's going to be moving out to Oregon from central Indiana, pulling it with that old Class C motorhome, and the trailer's loaded kind of heavy. I told him, you're going over the mountains, you better have some brakes in there, as heavy as that trailer is. And anyway, we got new electric brake assembly and a brake drum hub assembly, and got this jacked up. And fellas, you want to jack these trailers up behind the rear axle so it doesn't pick up on the front of the trailer. It'll set more tongue weight on the trailer and make your lift point a little bit more secure. But I've also got a jack stand under it with my bottle jack, and I used a pretty good sized plate, steel plate there. Let's see if I can get my light over here. That is pushing up on the trailer so it spreads out the load of the lift, and it won't damage the steel rail, because they're not real solid. But anyway, take your wheel off, and when a lot of these lug nuts, they get crammed on there several times and they start cutting into that taper seat, and they're really not safe at that point, because they won't retain the lug torque. So you probably ought to look at them and throw them away. But with the new hub and all that, we got new bearings and lug nuts come with it. So anyway, take your grease cap off and your retainer. This has got this thrust washer's got a flat spot on it, and the top of your spindle has got a flat spot on it right there. So when that goes on there, that won't turn with the bearing. And then your regular hex nut, and this one's got the kind of spring-loaded castle nut gripper that slips right over the top of the nut. But anyway, pull this off, and this whole assembly, we're just going to set that aside, and we'll clean that up, maybe use that for a later project. Maybe somebody has a hub or something go bad. A lot of times them bearings go bad and it chew up them hubs, and good to have a spare. But anyway, your axle's already got the brake flange welded onto it for your brake kit, and I've already run wire from the other side, and I zip tied it to the back of the axle. Put your wire along the back of the axle. Some of them have already got a hole drilled in them where you can run your wire inside of the axle. That's kind of a chore to get it in there, but this one wasn't pre-drilled and I wasn't going to drill it. But I use zip ties around the axle in 5 points all the way over to the other side, and you want to leave yourself plenty of wire hanging off on both ends, so when you wire up your brake magnet, you'll have plenty. And then I've already got wire running from the front, and I've got plenty here to cut off, but we'll hook on to this and then to the brake plate. But and you also want to make sure you don't put your wire on top of the axle, because if the axle bottoms out against the bottom of the trailer, it'll pinch your brake wires in two. So leave them to the rear of the axle tube. And anyway, we'll start getting these bearings packed, and well, let me put the brake assembly on there first, and it's really easy to do. Hang on a second. Here, your brake plate has got 4 studs that are welded into it. They fit right on there. Make sure you pull your wire out for your magnet. These are electric brakes, and take that dude and there is a right and a left, and so you need to make sure you got the right side or the correct side in the right place. Your short shoe, so you got a point from there to there, and on the back shoe your friction material is right up at the top. That's your primary shoe. The majority of your braking is coming from your rear shoe. That's why your front shoe doesn't have braking material all the way to the top. And anyway, those studs go through the back of that square flange. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. Let's see. Let me get my light. Yeah, you can see it right there. Yeah. So let me get them nuts put on there and we'll be right back. Yeah, we've got them nuts on there. Get them tightened up. These tighten up to 45, 50 foot-pounds torque, or German specs, you know, good and tight. And and you see the wires for the magnet right here. And these are not polar specific, it doesn't matter. One of them is ground, one of them is power, but it doesn't matter which one goes where. And so these two wires here are already connected to the other side, and we'll trim them down and connect those to these two green wires, and then the other two wires right here we'll bring back and connect up on them. And well, let me get the brake assembly tight, and we'll start hooking up those wires. Okay, I got these wires bundled, and each one of them is crimped into one wire to the right and one wire from the front. So one of them would be positive and one of them would be negative. But like I say, polarity doesn't matter. Then we'll get these green wires there connected in the other end of these butt connectors, and then we'll seal them up with some good black tape and bundle them up on the retainer. There's a little that white plastic rubber clip that holds it all up. Now they're all connected, now we'll get them sealed off. And you can see that the wires are bundled and tie strapped. I've wrapped the tie strap actually around the wires and then around the axle, and they're behind the axle and they can't get pinched if it was to bottom out. And there's plenty of give for the axle to work up and down, slack this wire to the frame, and then they're bundled to the back side of the brake drum. And so if you don't know how they work, when you apply brake pressure, you got a module or controller in the cab of the truck, and it puts pressure, electrical voltage actually, through those green wires into this magnet. And as the wheel is rotating counterclockwise on this side, this is the left side, this creates a magnet here, and that is drawn to the surface of the hub. It rides right along here, and it pulls this magnet into the drum, and as the drum rotates, it pulls that magnet back that way, and you can see it applies the brake pressure. And you want to get a good controller. Not all of them are worth a crap, and if you've got more than one axle, you really want to get a good one that you can control a little better. This is just a single axle, and most any of them will control it, but not all controllers will control more than one axle. So you need to know what you're buying there. And we're going to go ahead and adjust these brakes before we put the drum or the hub all together. So we'll just set the inner bearing on there and grab this hub, set it on there, and see how. See, that brake is very loose. So, like most any other drum brake, you got an adjuster right there that you have to turn, and that spreads the shoe out and gets them adjusted. And right is, or one direction is loosened and the other direction is tightened. So I can't do it and hold the camera. And we just turned that adjuster about 4 or 5 clicks, and you can just barely hear the rub, so that's going to be tight enough. Now we pulled the drum back off, took that inner bearing, set it down there in the grease packer, and boy, you just can't beat these. They're excellent. Just set it down there, cone shape, pointed down, and fellas, if you ain't got enough in your trunk, maybe have your wife stand on there for you. But I've got more in my trunk than my wife does, so I'll stand on there. And the colder it is, the more pressure it takes. Let's see if we got enough. Nope, it's not coming out. It's about 58, 60 degrees today. Been raining. Grease is starting to get a little tougher. There you can see it starting to come out. We'll mash it just a little bit more, get a little bit more in there. And you can't put too much grease in the bearing, but you can put too much grease in the hub. There is a such thing as too much grease. I've looked into that. I didn't never believe it, but if you put too much grease in there, the bearing won't roll. It'll slide. It'll slide across the race, and that's not good. That'll create more heat. You want your bearings to roll. And so instead of packing these dudes full, I just kind of fill them low spots, and got the bearing good and packed full of grease. And we'll set it down in there and locate the new seal. And you can use a fancy tool or a flat plate and drive it in and just flush it, or just be careful and kind of go around it and use a hammer that'll drive it in without bending it all up. Don't hit the rubber, because then you'll distort it and it won't seal. Now it seal's seated in there good, and these studs are countersunk beneath this surface that magnet rides on, so they don't strike that magnet. And not all trailer spindles are like this, but this one's got a grease channel right there, and right there is the grease zerk. You can take that rubber plug out of that center cap. There's a big hole opens up, and you can stick grease gun right on there, and you can apply grease, and it will only grease though just that inner bearing. The inner bearing, or the big bearing, is actually your load carrying bearing. The outer bearing is your stabilizer bearing, but this bearing is the one that carries the load. And so it gets the grease, and then it just kind of works its way out this way So if you pull a trailer a lot, then every time you service your power vehicle, you should take this that plug off the center cap and give this 2 or 3 shots of grease with a gun. Don't pack it full, but 2 or 3 shots every 4 to 6 or 7,000 miles is probably sufficient, unless you're running overloaded, and if you are, well, God help you. Anyway, we'll get this drum turned over, and we'll get the outer bearing greased, and we'll put just a dab more grease down inside there and get the hub put on. So it's cone side facing down, and that cone kind of goes into the center of the bearing, and just give her a good standing on. You can put a handful of grease in the palm of your hand and pack it up in there if that's what you like to do, but I don't like to do it that way. It takes a while, and this does the exact same thing. Grease in the bearing is grease in the bearing, no matter how it gets there. And anyway, you see it come right through there. That you're not going to get grease in a bearing any better than that. We'll get a little bit of friction reducer in there. Just fill the low spots. Don't fill the whole cavity. Just fill the low spots in the hub. Drop the new bearing in there. And then when you're setting it on there, just be careful not to drag your seal across the spindle and rake it and tear it. Okay, we slid the hub up on there. Got the outer bearing in. And your thrust washer, it looks like this has had a bearing spinning on it, so we'll put the rough side to the outside, but it's got a flat spot right across here. And your flat spot on the spindle, it only goes on one way. I mean, you can put it on that way or that way, but it only goes on one way, and it won't turn. That's why they call that a thrust washer. And then your regular, this nut, you don't tighten it to 89 foot-pounds. You don't even tighten it to 89 inch-pounds. And you don't even tighten it good and tight. You just tighten it up. See, that's run out. You don't want a lot of run out. You just tighten that up. I get a pair of pliers. Kind of gentle, and you're just seating that seal up over that shoulder on the spindle, and so we're seated up there tight. Well, we don't want it tight. We just want to pull the looseness out of the nut. Finger tight is enough. Those bearings will expand a little bit, slightly, with heat. You wouldn't be able to measure it, but if you got it real tight, then it has no room to expand. And so then we'll take this spring nut lock thing, and I don't know what you call it, but it just grabs that nut, and it's got a flat spot that sits right on top of that flat edge, and that locks that nut from being able to turn, as well as that thrust washer's got that flat edge, and that keeps it from turning, so it's not driving that nut. And then we got a new grease cap to knock on there. just kind of put it on one side and then hit it up here in the top and just work your way around and drive it on. But that rubber seal comes out and you can go right through and grease that zerk. But anyway, let's get that cap put on. Okay, we got the grease cap on and got the wheel set up on here. It's a new tire and wheel. And when you crank these lug nuts down real tight, you also cut into that wheel. So I don't know what the actual foot-pound torque is. Somewhere around maybe 80, 85. But you might want to look into that. But I just two or three ooga doogas and that's enough. You know, when it quits turning freely with the impact, you know, maybe another little rattle or two, and that's enough. But with new wheels, you should recheck your lug torque. Just carry you a breaker bar or whatever in a 13/16 socket, or about a 21 millimeter, whatever you might happen to have, and check your lugs every maybe 500 miles after you've driven it. And every time when I'm pulling my trailer, when I'm fueling up, I'll go around and I'll feel the wheel, so I can feel if the wheel bearing's getting hot, and I'll feel the tire and see if the tire's getting hot. And I can go around all four tires and wheels, and I can check everything in just a matter of a minute. So you can just barely hear that wheel, that drum rubbing them brakes, and they're rough, and they'll smooth off as they burnish in, and that slight bit of rub that you hear will be gone in just a few miles of braking. Then of course, to put brakes on a trailer that didn't have it, you got to run wires. And I drilled a hole in the cross members and not the frame rail to run it through, to keep the wire up above where nothing should be able to grab hold of. If you'd run over something, it wouldn't grab them wires. And then where I went through a pass-through, I took black tape and wrapped about 10 wraps around right where it went through the pass-through, so the wires wouldn't chafe and short out on the frame. And then I put a junction box right here on the frame, and the original wires coming, and they go in there, and there's a bunch of terminal ends in there, or posts, threaded posts that you put each wire on. And I really like this, because if you've got a problem, say with just this from here to the trailer lights, all you got to do is take this off and maybe fix a terminal end there, or replace a wire or whatever. You don't have to mess with the other wires. Just take them two screws out and that cap comes off. And got a new 7-wire sealed trailer lead going in there. And I run a ground wire coming back and went to the frame. I took a grinder and shined up that metal around there, so that bolt and that eyelet will make a good connection to the frame. And then I sprayed some primer sealer around it on both sides. Now I dropped my phone. Isn't that nice? Let's see. I turned my phone around. That's how. There you go. There you go. That's where that ground bolt goes through. I sealed it there too. Anyway,